When I was younger, I made some bad choices, got caught up with the wrong crowd. I was naive, impulsive, and often reckless. I fell into habits like vaping and drinking, behaviors I'm not proud of. There's no excuse for the way I acted back then, but if I'm being honest, I was just drowning in depression and anxiety. Life felt overwhelming, and foolishly, I believed I could numb the pain by distracting myself. The root of that pain was losing my best friend Maya when I was just 16. Maya and I were extremely close, to the point that people sometimes mistook us for sisters. We'd grown up together, practically inseparable. We had all these plans, going to college together, moving in together, adopting a whole pack of dogs to raise in the perfect little house we'd dreamed up. It probably sounds childish now, but those dreams were everything to us. Maya was my person. Whenever I was stressed or upset, she knew exactly how to calm me down. So when she and her parents died in a car accident while they were on vacation, I was devastated. The accident was so bad their bodies couldn't be identified. Their relatives had to hold a funeral without them, without being able to say a proper goodbye. Losing Maya was like losing a part of myself. I was only 16, and I didn't know how to cope. The grief was overwhelming, and I missed her so much it was almost a physical ache. Sure, I had other friends, but no one came close to Maya. She was irreplaceable, and that made the loneliness even worse. After she died, school became unbearable. Just walking into the building felt like a weight on my chest. I hated the constant reminders of all the things we'd planned to do together, things that would never happen. I stopped caring about my classes, started failing, and avoided people as much as I could. I didn't have the energy to talk to anyone, and honestly, I didn't want to. I became this hollow shell of myself, just going through the motions. That's when I turned to smoking and drinking. At first, it felt like a solution, a way to escape the crushing weight of my grief. When I was high or drunk, the pain dulled for a little while, and I could pretend I was okay. It was a break from constantly missing Maya, from the suffocating emptiness. But what I didn't realize was how quickly I was becoming dependent on those things. Alcohol and vaping weren't just a distraction anymore. They were my coping mechanism. I needed them more and more just to feel normal. By the time my parents realized what was happening, I was already in too deep. They tried to talk to me, to get through, but I wouldn't listen. I was so wrapped up in my pain, convinced that I didn't need anyone's help. I told myself I was fine, even when I wasn't. I ignored their advice and kept sinking further into habits that were destroying me. I couldn't see it then, but I was spiraling. The next 2 years were a blur of bad decisions and selfish behavior. I became a complete nightmare for my family. I was out of control, staying out late with no regard for their worry or the trouble I might get into. I'd take my dad's car without permission, often putting myself and others in danger by drinking and driving. Looking back, it's terrifying to think of the risks I took, how reckless I was with my life. I was so deep in my own pain and chaos that I didn't think about anyone else. I even stole money from my stepmom, convincing myself that my dad wouldn't notice or that it didn't matter. In my mind, it was all about me, my grief, my escape, my way of numbing everything I didn't want to feel. I didn't stop to consider how my actions were tearing my family apart, or how I was affecting my little sister Claire. She deserved better. She deserved a role model, someone to look up to. But instead, I was selfish and absent, too consumed by my own downward spiral to see the damage I was doing. To this day, I wish I had been a better daughter to my parents and a better older sister to Claire. Things finally came crashing down when one night, my friends and I got caught drinking. We were all underage, so the police were called. We had to wait in a holding cell for our parents to show up. When they arrived, I could see the exhaustion and frustration on their faces. The car ride home was brutal. My dad was furious, yelling at me the entire way, his voice filled with anger and hurt. My mom just kept saying how disappointed she was in me, over and over again. Hearing that from her stung more than anything. I didn't fight back or argue. I knew they were right. I had been acting like a complete mess, and I deserved their anger. I sat there in silence, feeling the weight of their words and the reality of what I'd become. It was one of the lowest points in my life, and for the first time, I couldn't ignore how far I'd fallen. When we finally got home, my dad turned to me and said he couldn't let me live in his house anymore. He didn't sugarcoat it. He wanted me gone. away from them, before I could ruin their lives any further. My mom agreed, saying I was too toxic to be around, that they couldn't risk my behavior rubbing off on Claire. They didn't want her to become another version of me. Hearing those words felt like a punch to the gut. As much as I knew I'd been out of control, hearing my own parents say they didn't want me around anymore was devastating. I had pushed them too far, and now I was facing the consequences. In the end, they decided to send me to live with my paternal grandparents, who lived hours away. At that point, I hadn't been close to them for years. When I was younger, I adored them. We had a warm and loving relationship, but as I got older and fell into my downward spiral, I'd lost touch. So I was surprised that my parents wanted me to go live with them. I tried to reason with my parents, but they didn't budge. My dad threatened that if I didn't want to live with my grandparents, I could find my own place because they were done looking after me. I had no choice. Part of me wondered why my grandparents even agreed to take me in, considering the mess I'd become. But I was also grateful they were giving me a place to stay when my own parents didn't want me. I knew this was my last chance to turn things around. At least now I had somewhere to go, and maybe, just maybe, I could figure out how to rebuild my life. From the moment I arrived, my grandparents welcomed me into their home and their lives. Grandma was especially kind and understanding. She told me that she and Grandpa knew I'd been going through a hard time and assured me they were there to help me heal and get back on track. She even told me not to hold any resentment towards my parents for kicking me out, explaining that they were struggling too and probably didn't know how else to handle the situation. Grandma's words stuck with me. She was the first person besides Maya who actually sat down with me, listened to what I had to say, and made me feel like I mattered, like I was a person, not just a problem to be fixed. At first, I felt awkward living with my grandparents. I wasn't used to the quiet life they led, or the way they seemed to genuinely care about me without any conditions or judgment. But as the weeks turned into months, I began to settle in. I started to see their home as a safe space, and the awkwardness eventually faded. Over time, I started attending the local community college. In the afternoons, I helped Grandpa on his farm. Anyone who's done farm work knows it isn't easy. There were long hours of physical labor, and I often came back to the house completely exhausted. But that exhaustion became a blessing in disguise. I was so tired at the end of each day that I didn't have the energy or even the desire to turn to alcohol or vaping anymore. Slowly but surely, my mind began to clear, and I started to feel like a better version of myself. I even started going to therapy to address the deeper issues I'd been avoiding for so long. Talking to a therapist was eye-opening. It helped me confront the grief I'd buried after losing Maya, and face the unhealthy ways I'd tried to cope. During this time, my parents had completely cut off contact. They said they needed space, and just left me on my own with my grandparents to figure things out. As much as it hurt, I tried to respect their wishes. My therapist suggested I use writing as a way to communicate with them, specifically writing letters. The idea was to express what I was feeling, what I was working on, and how I was trying to become a better person. It was a way to bridge the gap, even if they weren't ready to talk to me directly. So that's what I did. Every week, without fail, I wrote a letter to my parents. I poured my heart into those letters, sharing my thoughts, progress, and reflections. I told them about the therapy sessions, about the farm work with Grandpa, about college, and how much I regretted the pain I had caused them. It gave me hope that one day they might pick up the phone, call my grandparents, or even write back, but they never did. For nearly 4 years, I sent those letters faithfully, hoping each time that this one might be the one to make a difference. Still, there was no response, just silence. Occasionally, I'd hear updates about my family through my cousins. They'd tell me how my parents were doing fine, how Claire was excelling at school and making them proud. I couldn't help but feel a pang of jealousy when I heard those things. I wanted to be part of that life again, to feel like I belonged. But clearly, they didn't want me anymore. Slowly, I learned to let them go and stopped sending the letters. Over the years, I carried on, living my life, working on myself. After graduating from college, I landed a job as a telemarketer, a role that surprisingly turned out to be a perfect fit. I've always been social, and I discovered I had a natural talent for persuasion. Over the years, my knack for engaging with people and my persistence paid off. I steadily climbed the ranks in the company, first getting promoted to team leader and eventually to my current position as a sales manager. One of the perks of my job is its flexibility. Since most of my responsibilities can be handled with just a laptop, Wi-Fi, and a webcam, I've been able to stay with my grandparents. This arrangement has allowed me to save a significant portion of my income while also being there for them. They took care of me for years when I needed it most, and now I try to return the favor in any way I can. I buy groceries, pay their utility bills, and help Grandpa with the farm animals whenever I'm not working. 2 months ago, something amazing happened. Grandpa helped me secure a small piece of land that was being auctioned off at a very low price. I poured my entire life savings into buying it, and I can honestly say it's the best decision I've ever made. I chose to invest in this land because I didn't want to move away from my grandparents or this community. This place has become my sanctuary. It's where I found a sense of belonging, where I have friends I enjoy spending time with, and where I've built meaningful connections with neighbors who treat me like family. Most importantly, this place doesn't remind me of my dark past. Over the past few weeks, I've been slowly working on building a house on my land, while also working full-time. It's been hectic and stressful, but it feels good to be building something of my own. Then yesterday, out of nowhere, I was informed that my parents had finally reached out to my grandparents, wanting to talk to me. After almost a decade of silence, I had been out grocery shopping at the time. When I came back home, Grandma sat me down gently and told me about the call. It was the last thing I expected to hear. Apparently, my parents had told my grandparents they missed me after all these years and wanted me to call them back as soon as possible. My first reaction was pure confusion. After nearly 10 years of hearing nothing, no replies to my letters, no acknowledgement of my efforts, no attempt to mend things, now, all of a sudden, they wanted to talk. It didn't make sense. I could see the same surprise mirrored in my grandparents' expressions. They were just as shocked as I was. Grandpa, who never minced words, told me that I could just ignore them, the way they had ignored me all those years. He'd seen how hard I'd worked to rebuild my life. He didn't want me to get hurt again. Grandma assured me that the decision was entirely mine. She said that whether I chose to reach out to them or not, she and Grandpa would support me and stand by my side. I was overwhelmed with a mix of emotions. Should I be happy? Anxious? I was unsure of what to do next. Was I wrong to even consider not responding to them after they'd pretty much forgotten about me all these years? I thought about it a lot. I realized that maybe I owed it to them to at least hear them out before I just ignored them. So that's what I decided to do. It's been a month since then. The reason I couldn't update sooner is because a lot has happened. Turns out my parents had an ulterior motive for reaching out. We had a video call, which initially started off on a positive note. My parents told me how glad they were about the progress I'd made, and how happy they were to hear from relatives and my grandparents that I had completely turned my life around. It felt good to hear those words from them after so many years of silence and rejection. For a brief moment, it felt like I was finally being seen for the person I had become. Then they spent 20 minutes bragging about my sister and all the things she had accomplished. They went on and on, telling me how proud they were of her, how she was doing so well in life, how she was excelling in every way. Of course, I was happy for Claire. She deserved all the praise, and I never wanted to take anything away from her. But in that moment, it felt like they were rubbing it in. I mean, this was our first conversation after so long. Anyway, after that, my dad finally admitted there was a reason they had reached out after all these years. He explained that they had heard through relatives that I had bought a piece of land and made significant financial progress, which they had never expected. He joked about how he had always thought Claire would be the successful one, but it turned out I was the one who had surpassed all his expectations. I was caught off guard by his backhanded compliment, but I just laughed awkwardly to ease the tension. I didn't know where he was going with this. He then went on to say how he and Mom had a favor to ask me. When I asked what he meant, my dad hesitated for a moment before revealing that my mom had been diagnosed with breast cancer. I was stunned. He continued to explain how they hadn't told anyone about it yet, as it had only been a month. My mom had started chemotherapy, but she also needed surgery, and apparently the costs were piling up. My dad told me how, over the years, he had used up most of his money to help Claire through college and even bought her an apartment. Which is why now, with Mom's unexpected medical emergency, They just didn't have enough money left to cover her treatment. This is why, when they found out about my land purchase, they finally reached out, hoping I could help. My mom told me she understood how this might sound to me, how it might feel strange or uncomfortable to help them out financially, given everything that had happened between us. She acknowledged the years of silence, but she said they were desperate. The bills were rising, and they just didn't have the resources to cover them. They had nowhere else to turn but to me. She suggested that I could perhaps move back home to live with them, and this way we could finally start to rebuild our relationship and make things right. At that moment, I felt a rush of conflicting emotions. On one hand, hearing that my mom was battling cancer was devastating. Of course I wanted to help her. She was my mother. But on the other hand, I couldn't just go back home to them. My whole life was here now. I also couldn't ignore the frustration and bitterness I still felt from the years they had cut me off. I couldn't help but wonder why they were asking me for help in the first place when they had their beloved daughter to turn to instead. So I asked them if Claire knew about Mom's cancer, and they confirmed that she did, but that they felt she was too young to help them, and that she shouldn't be burdened with their medical bills. Apparently, my sister also didn't have a good enough job like mine, so according to them, I was the only one who could really assist them in their time of need. I told them quite honestly that if they had reached out to me before I bought my land, I would have had the financial means to help them readily. But after this purchase, I had no life savings left. I had invested everything into my future and was working hard to refill my bank account, while also building myself a house. I had no money left to send them. My dad then interrupted me, telling me that I could start by at least sending them a few hundred from my salary every month. As for the rest of the money, he urged me to talk to my grandparents and see if they could pitch in. If it was still not enough, then he suggested that I could also arrange a fundraiser, perhaps online, to raise money for Mom's treatment and help them out in any way that I could. I was surprised at how casually they seemed to expect me to just jump into the role of their financial savior after all this time. I mean, this was our first conversation in almost a decade, and they were already asking me for money, asking me to fix their financial problems, without so much as acknowledging the emotional weight of everything that had happened between us. I told them that if they really needed a few hundred, maybe I could send them something, but there was no guarantee. I had my own financial struggles to deal with, and I couldn't stretch myself any thinner. I also made it clear that I would never ask my grandparents to loan my parents any money. They had already done so much for me over the years, and they already had enough on their plate. My grandparents didn't deserve to be dragged into this situation again. When I said that, I could see my parents' reaction shift instantly. They were not happy. My mom's face tightened, and she immediately started to accuse me of being inconsiderate. She said they would have never reached out to me if they hadn't been desperate. But now she was disappointed that I was still the same selfish, immature child who only thought of myself. She reminded me how I had almost ruined their lives with my bad choices all those years ago. I argued with my mom that, although I acknowledged my wrongdoing, it's not like they didn't punish me for it. I mean, they had literally shipped me off to my grandparents and had cut off contact with me. Not once had they reached out to ask how I was doing or even acknowledged what I had been through. And now, when they finally did contact me, it was all about what they needed from me. How could they have the nerve to call me selfish when they had never once considered my feelings or struggles? My dad exasperatedly said that they couldn't go back and change things, but now they knew I was doing well in life, and that's exactly why they were reaching out. He mentioned the sacrifices he and Mom had made raising me and how after everything they had done for me, he felt it was the least I could do to send money for my mom's treatment. He even had the nerve to suggest that I could properly look into selling off my land, the land I had worked so hard to purchase, and give them the entire amount. He assured me that if I did that, they would never ask me for any money again in the future. At that moment, all I saw was red. I felt my chest tighten with anger, and I told them flat out that I owed them nothing. I had already apologized over and over again in all the letters I had written to them over the years, but it was clear they had never even bothered to read them. I made it clear that whatever I had become, whatever progress I had made, was because of my own hard work and the support of my grandparents, who never abandoned me, no matter how awful I had been. I told my parents that if there was anyone I would be willing to sacrifice for, it would be them, my grandparents, who had helped me become a better person, and who had been there for me when my own parents had walked away. They were the ones who gave me a second chance at life, not my parents. My mom tried to argue back, but I told her I didn't care what she and Dad thought of me anymore. I was done with this conversation, done with trying to make them understand. I had spent enough time and energy trying to win their approval, and it had only ever led to more disappointment and hurt. They had made their choices over the years, and now I was making mine. I was finished. They needed to find a way to help themselves, or ask their youngest daughter to pitch in, because I wouldn't be doing anything for them. Since that heated conversation, my dad has been sending me a constant stream of messages, trying to guilt-trip me into feeling responsible. He's told me how my mom has been crying for days over what I said, and how hurt she is by my words. He says that if anything happens to her, it will all be on me. Part of me feels guilty. After all, it's my mom, and no one wants to hear their mom is sick, no matter how complicated their relationship is. But at the same time, I can't let them manipulate me into giving them money when I really don't have any. I'm just so exhausted by this. It's been 4 months since my last update. I just wanted to let you all know that I still haven't helped my parents, and neither have my grandparents. My parents eventually did tell my grandparents about my mom's cancer and asked them for money. Luckily, my grandfather immediately turned them down and refused to send them any money without hesitation. He told my dad that he needed to step up and take care of Mom, as it wasn't our responsibility to do so. The only thing my grandma offered was to fly down there herself to take care of my mom if she ever needed it. But beyond that, they were not able to offer anything else. When my parents heard this, they were furious. But honestly, there wasn't much they could do about it. After all, my grandparents aren't obligated to help them, especially after everything that has happened between us all. I guess my parents are finally reaping the consequences of their own actions. Also, for everyone asking, Claire hasn't reached out to me at all. I'm not sure if my parents ever told her about our conversation, or if she just doesn't know, but it's clear my sister wants nothing to do with me, so I won't interfere with her life. This whole situation has been a roller coaster. I'm still processing everything, and I'm not sure what the future holds, but I'm trying to focus on the present, on my life here, on building my house, and on continuing to heal. It's been a while since my last update. Life has been, eventful, to say the least. The drama with my parents hasn't calmed down, and honestly, it's been draining. After my dad's guilt-tripping attempts failed, he changed tactics. He started sending me pictures and videos of my mom, showing her looking frail and weak, hooked up to machines in the hospital. It was a blatant attempt to manipulate my emotions, and it almost worked. I felt this surge of sympathy, this urge to rush to her side and make everything better. But then I remembered all the hurt, the years of rejection, the way they'd treated me like I was disposable. I couldn't let them use my mom's illness to control me again. It wasn't fair. It wasn't right. I confided in my therapist about the situation, and she helped me see things more clearly. She reminded me that I wasn't responsible for their choices, that I had my own life to live, and that it was okay to set boundaries. It was tough love, but it was exactly what I needed to hear. So I made a decision. I called my dad and told him, in no uncertain terms, to stop sending me those pictures and videos. I told him it was emotional blackmail, and it wasn't going to work. I also reiterated that I wouldn't be sending them any money, and that they needed to figure out their own finances. It was a difficult conversation, but I felt a sense of relief afterwards. I had finally stood up for myself. Since then, things have been relatively quiet. I haven't heard much from my parents, which, honestly, is a blessing. I've been focusing on my own life, on finishing my house, and on spending time with my grandparents. They've been my rock throughout this whole ordeal, offering unwavering support and understanding. I'm so grateful for them. But just when I thought the drama was over, something unexpected happened. A few weeks ago, I received a friend request on social media from Claire. I was surprised, to say the least. We hadn't spoken in years, and I had no idea how she even found me. After some hesitation, I accepted her request. Almost immediately, she messaged me. She apologized for not reaching out sooner, and explained that she had been unaware of what had happened between me and our parents. Apparently, they had kept everything a secret from her, painting me as the villain who abandoned the family. Claire told me she only recently learned the truth from a relative, and she was furious with our parents for lying to her all these years. She also expressed her regret for not being there for me when I needed her most. Reading her message, I felt a mix of emotions: sadness, anger, but also a glimmer of hope. It was good to know that my sister didn't hate me, that she actually cared. We started chatting online, catching up on each other's lives. It was a bit awkward at first, but we slowly started rebuilding our relationship. Claire told me she wants to come visit me soon, and I'm really looking forward to it. It would be great to reconnect with her in person, to have my sister back in my life. As for my parents, I'm still not sure where things stand. Maybe one day we'll be able to have a healthy relationship, but for now, I'm keeping my distance. I need to protect myself, to prioritize my own well-being. This whole experience has taught me a lot about family, forgiveness, and setting boundaries. It's been a painful journey, but I've come out stronger on the other side. I've learned to rely on myself, to trust my instincts, and to surround myself with people who truly care about me. And for that, I'm grateful.